There's so much misunderstanding about tariffs, especially with Howard Lutnick. First of all, yes, he talks about, and so does Donald Trump, the good old days, in the 19th century when we only had tariffs. And he concludes that the reason the economy was so good back then is because we ran on tariffs. That's not exactly it. I mean, his logic is a little faulty. The reason we had a strong economy in the 19th century was because we had a tiny government. The government was so small that we could afford it on tariffs. That's why we didn't have an income tax, because we didn't need an income tax. Today, the government is much bigger because of the income tax. And what Howard Lutnick also doesn't understand is the reason we have an income tax, the agitation to get it. It was part of the populist movement to shift the burden of taxation from the working class to the rich. And everybody knew back then when the country ran on tariffs, who paid them? It was the middle class and the poor who bought the products that were tariffed. And so the government sold the country on the income tax as a trade-off for the tariffs. They said, hey, we can get rid of these tariffs that you have to pay, and we'll have income taxes that the rich are going to pay. And that was an impetus for it. Of course, now the middle class are taxed at rates far higher than anything envisioned for Rockefeller or Vanderbilt or Carnegie or those guys. But at least people understood tariff. Lutnick has no clue. He keeps talking about the External Revenue Department as if these tariffs are going to be paid by Canada and Mexico or China. They're not. We can't tax those countries. All of the money that comes in from tariffs, every penny of it, whatever the government collects, comes out of the pocket of American consumers. That's it. It's like a sales tax. When you go and you buy something and there's a sales tax, the store doesn't pay the sales tax. You pay it. Same thing with tariffs. The tariffs are paid by the importer, not the exporter. Whatever company imports the product pays the tax. And then that tax gets passed on to the consumer in the price. Now, we need higher taxes because we're running huge deficits. So, in that respect, the tariffs will help shrink the deficits. But they are a tax hike and people are going to be impacted. It's going to increase the pressure on American families who are struggling right now. And it's not going to bring manufacturing home. I mean, not anytime soon. And even if we brought manufacturing home, how are we going to finance that? I mean, you can't manufacture without factory, so you got to build the factories before you can make anything. But also the factories need supply chains. We don't have those. We've got to reestablish those. So to recreate the industrial base that we no longer have is going to take many, many years and require a huge sacrifice. We have to finance the build out. And then we have to train the workers or build the robots or whatever. But it's going to take a lot of resources. And that means we have to stop spending and start saving. That means we're going to get higher interest rates. That means we got to get much lower stock prices and real estate prices. That means we go through a huge recession. That means we have a lot of bankruptcies and defaults and cuts to government spending. So all of this stuff will help in the long run, but it's going to be really painful in the short run. And nobody is prepared for that. Donald Trump is telling everybody it's going to be fantastic. It's a golden age. It's going to be very difficult because we're going to be in a huge recession very quickly. And the question is, are they going to stick to it or are they going to go back for stimulus? Okay, cut rates, print money. We got to stimulate now. We're in a recession. And that's going to send already soaring inflation through the roof. Well, I don't think we're going into recession because of the tariffs. I think we're going to go into recession anyway. Tariffs will just make it worse. But no, it won't be deflationary. Look at the dollar. The dollar is tanking right now, and it looks like it's about to fall through a trap door. So that's going to increase pressure even more upward on prices in addition to the tariffs. And, look what's happening with bond yields. And, bond yields are going up now all over Europe and Asia because now their governments are spending more money because they need to, rearm. We're telling them, hey, we're not going to protect you anymore. And so they're going to try to spend more money on defense. And so yields are soaring in Europe and Japan. That's putting more upward pressure on bond yields here. That's happening. You're seeing that. So we're going to see interest rates rising, mortgage rates rising, consumer prices rising. And, if we put these tariffs on, if they stick on Mexico and Canada, some of the biggest imports that we have from Mexico and Canada are food. And food is already one of the, prices that Americans are struggling the most with. And tariffs are going to make food a lot more expensive. And in fact, on his State of the Union address or during it, Trump talked about how farmers are about to, make a lot of money. Well, if they make a lot of money, it's because the food prices go up. So that might be great for the 1% of us who are farming, but the 99% who are just eating, it's not going to be that great. No, unfortunately, I really wish we would see the end of the income tax, but I think we will get tax cuts because everybody wants, tax cuts for the middle class. So those are coming for sure. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. Those are highly inflationary tax cuts because all they do is blow up the deficit even further. They don't increase productivity. They just increase consumption because they're focused on, it's a demand strip driven stimulus. So we'll get that. But I don't think we're going to get a reduction in government spending. On the contrary, I mean, government spending is going to go up a lot. Now, at least we'll get rid of some of the waste, fraud, and abuse from DOGE, but it's not going to be enough to really move the needle in a significant way because the increases that we're going to get in government spending on autopilot from this recession are just going to blow anything we've seen in the past, away. And, you have interest on the national debt. Right now, we're spending over $100 billion a month on interest on the debt. That's $1.2 trillion a year all by itself, apart from everything else. And that figure is a moving target because it keeps going up every month because more low yielding notes mature and we got to roll them over at much higher rates. Plus we have new money to borrow. So all that debt is going to weigh heavily on the dollar. That's going to push up prices more. So it's stagflation, but it's not stagflation where, okay, the economy is weak. It's going to be an outright recession and inflation is going to be high. It's not just going to be above the Fed's 2% target, maybe double digits. So worse inflation than we had under Biden and a weaker economy than we had under Biden. In fact, today, Challenger announced the most monthly layoff job cuts since April of 2020 when we were in COVID. Of course, Donald Trump was president then too. So we haven't had a month of job cuts this bad since Trump's first term. We're going to get the official non-farm payroll report. We'll see if that has a negative number on that as well. Every year, Senator Rand Paul has a whole list of these grievances for his Festivus video, and he goes over all these same idiotic programs. It's not like nobody knew about these things. The reason that Trump got elected is he ran on a populist platform. So cutting government in the abstract is popular, especially if you say it's just waste, fraud, and abuse. Sure, if there's trillions of dollars of waste, fraud, and abuse, yeah, everybody's for getting rid of that, right? But the problem is there's not. There is waste, fraud, and abuse in government because that's part of government. That's the nature of the beast. Now, if you try to get rid of some of it, yeah, that'd be great. You're never going to get rid of all of it. The only thing you could do is get rid of government itself, right? As much government. So if you get rid of an entire agency, like Trump is talking about getting rid of the Department of Education, yeah, okay, then we'll get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse in the Department of Education, like assuming, we have to get rid of it. It's like you got to rip it out by the root because if you leave the waste, fraud, and abuse is going to still be there because there's no checks and balances. In the free market economy, there's very little waste because nobody wastes their own money. And if you're running a business, you got to be lean and mean. If you're wasting money, not only is it costing you money, but your competitor is going to eat your lunch. He'll be able to, undercut you. But in government, no one gives a damn about wasting taxpayers' money. Who cares? It's not your money. You don't get a pay cut if you spent too much. In fact, you actually get rewarded if you spend more. You get more money. You get a bigger staff. So it's just a perverse system in government. So that's why you want to keep government really small. But so Donald Trump did not run on a platform of, we got to cut Social Security. We got to cut Medicare, right? So if that's your platform, you ain't going to do anything. The problem is entitlements and defense. And they want to increase. The Republican budget that they passed has like $100 billion increase in defense spending. We're telling the world we're not going to defend you anymore. Okay, well, why don't we cut spending? I mean, why are we spending more if we're going to defend less? That doesn't make any sense. But we're spending more. We can't cut interest on the debt unless we default, which is not a bad idea, but we're not going to do that. So he didn't really run on shrinking government in any way that's painful. He promised we can cut government, but nobody's going to lose any of their benefit. And that's not possible. So we need somebody to run on an austerity platform on, it's time to bite the bullet and swallow the bitter tasting medicine. That's how Milei in Argentina got elected. He said, look, we got to do the right thing and it's going to hurt, but it's going to be worth it. That isn't the platform that got Trump elected. things aren't bad enough yet. Things have to be really bad for that message to win. Because if they're already really bad, hey, we got nothing to lose. But as long as everybody is still borrowing money and spending it, and nobody's going to win on that message, right? Don't shoot the messenger. If you bring that message, the voters will shoot you at the polls. But Trump's message was a great message. I'm going to make everything better the minute I'm in office. Remember, he said prices are going to start falling on day one. It's like, just put me in office and I'm going to make the inflation disappear. The inflation didn't start with Biden. He handed Biden. In fact, if you annualize the last 2 months of Trump's presidency and the first 2 months of Biden before his first stimulus bill was passed and the checks got in the mail, inflation was at 5%. If you annualize those 4 months. And the worst 3 months of the Biden presidency on inflation were those next 3 months. In his first year in office, April, May, June, those 3 months annualized were like 14% inflation. How could Donald Trump say none of that was his fault? Right? I mean, he had just left because he's going to be blaming all the 2025 inflation on Biden. So how come he can't accept responsibility for some of the 2021 inflation? But that's when the the stimulus checks first hit at the end of March. They didn't start impacting prices till April, but a lot of it was lagged, into a couple months. But remember, Trump sent out his own stimmy checks and the whole PPP program, right? That was a disaster. I mean, that caused a lot of inflation. That happened before Biden. Even if we cut the budget, inflation based on all the money we've already printed and that is now making its way through the economy and based on the renewed weakness of the dollar, we're going to have inflation rates well above the Fed's 2% target. I'd say we'll be lucky if inflation is only, in the 4 to 6% range, right, over the rest of Trump's term. But if inflation is, let's say, 5%, interest rates are too low right now. They got to be a couple of, percent above the inflation rate, right? You got to get a positive return to lend money. So we're not going to get lower interest rates. And in fact, if the Fed resumes cuts, rates on the long end are going higher. The only way we're going to get a temporary drop in interest rates is if we go back to QE. But it'll only be temporary because the QE unleashes even more inflation. And so eventually inflation will push those rates higher, even though the Fed is buying the bonds because everybody else in the world will be selling. But also, I think that right now, Europe is going to be, going into this arms race. They're going to be spending a lot of money on building up their military. I think a lot of that is going to be paid for by selling treasuries. They have to borrow a lot of money. And so they want to tap into the same people that have been lending us money. And so if German rates go up and now people are like, okay, I'll buy bunds instead of treasuries, right? We got to compete with them for sovereign credit. So rates are going up. I mean, Besant may want them to go down, but they're going to go up whether he wants it or not. I think our markets are already so overpriced, our stock market. And if we're in a recession and the Fed is printing money, that flight capital is more likely to go into gold. Maybe it'll go into emerging markets. I mean, they're pretty cheap, so if I'm in Europe and I want to get my money out of Europe, I don't have to go to the United States. There are other places I could go. And I think money might go into some of these commodity economies like Canada, like Australia, because I think we're going to see a boom in metal prices.